Welcome to Kevin Makes Cool Things. I'm Kevin, and this is my 3D printed trainee badge from the Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash series. It's the kind of bronze dog tag you find in a lot of fantasy series once a character joins a guild. I watched Grimgar shortly after the anime came out and enjoyed it. A few months ago, I binged the light novel and gained a different appreciation for the series, so I decided to make something from it. This tag is only mentioned early on. Brittany hands these out when the characters join the volunteer soldier squad. The badges have some significance in the anime and the first couple of volumes of the light novel, but they weren't really relevant for the rest of the series. In the anime, Brittany is holding 2 of these badges, which is never really addressed, and I'm pretty sure there was only 1 in the light novel. The 2 badges in the anime seem to be identical, so if you feel strongly about this, you can just print and paint 2 of these instead of 1. I ended up making 4 and trying different techniques on them, but I'll talk more about that later. There are no pictures of the badge in the light novel, at least not that I remember, so I queued up the anime and took some screenshots from episode 1. Then I opened up OpenSCAD and got started. My first big hurdle was the shape. At first, I thought I could just take a cylinder and scale it to stretch it out, but then I realized that was all wrong. Eventually, I found a solution. I created a cylinder, then used a difference to cut it in half. I scaled the cylinder to stretch it out, which gave me the elongated shape I needed, but the tip was still all wrong. Then I used a difference and an intersection to isolate this part and scaled it down, which fixed the tip. Since this was a single cylinder that I had sliced up and scaled in steps, it all still fit together perfectly. I fiddled with the exact cutoffs and sizes until I got it just right. This was done in a module, so I called it again and rotated it around, creating this beauty. I'm not going to say this was the best solution, but it worked, and that's all that matters. Now I focused on creating the general outline of the tag. The actual badge is probably thinner than this. I imagine it like a pressed penny, or maybe something a little thicker. I went as thin as I could while still giving myself a few millimeters to work with for the details. I wanted the edges of the tag to be rounded, which was difficult given the shape. I created a module that let me specify the rounding radius and the slice thickness. From there, it would create a number of layers and use trigonometry to scale them down so the edge curved nicely. I did the same internally and created this nice rounded edge. Once again, I'm not sure if this was the best solution, but it worked. These 2 details are just things I placed and shaped with a cylinder and a difference. I fiddled with the size and placement until it looked good. The hexagonal pattern was surprisingly easy. I decided on some measurements, which I stored in variables, and calculated some points. I used a loop and hull to connect these dots, which gave me the frame for a single piece of the pattern. Then I used a loop to create a single row, and then another loop to create a bunch of rows. Lastly, I trimmed it down to size and cut the pattern into the tag using a difference. Since everything was stored in variables, I could easily tweak the sizes until it looked right. Then I went through and cleaned up certain parts of this, like bits of the hexagonal pattern that poked out awkwardly. Then the model was done and ready for printing. Like I mentioned earlier, I ended up making 4 of these. I had previously done something like this with my Shadow Exchange runestone from solo leveling, and I decided to try it again. I tried painting versus gilding, and also nicely finishing the prints versus taking them straight out of the printer. I always invest time finishing my prints, and I've always wondered if it's worth it. For 2 of these tags, I spent maybe 10 minutes each sanding them. I couldn't use wood filler like I do on my larger prints because wood filler only works if you have a way to sand it off. I don't currently have the tools to sand the details within these tags, so I did the best I could. Afterwards, I applied a few thick coats of white paint to help cover some of the little imperfections I couldn't sand. For the unfinished tags, I just applied a quick coat of white paint as a base. The metallic paint exceeded expectations. This is the same brand I used on my Aventurine wand, and I highly recommend it. For gilding, I laid down an orange base coat to help make my mistakes less obvious, and then applied some rose gold colored leaf. The details made this really hard, and I did not do a good job. Beforehand, I knew I wasn't good at gilding, but this project really drove that point home. Afterwards, I covered both in a layer of Mod Podge to finish them off. Before the big reveal, I need to mention that some time passed before I made this video, and the gilded tags did not age well. So this is the final result. Both gilded tags look pretty terrible. I don't know what went wrong, and I don't really care. I don't think I'll be gilding anything in the future. Even though they both look bad, I think the unfinished one looks way worse because the layer lines are clearly visible. This is the one I spent 15 minutes finishing, and it looks way smoother. The painted tags came out way better, and the difference is even more obvious. The unfinished one clearly has layer lines. The one I spent a few more minutes on looks way better, and while there are still some imperfections, I think that's fine because this is supposed to be an adventurer's tag. Aside from a few places I couldn't really sand, you can barely tell this is 3D printed. If you were going to make one of these, I'd invest 15 minutes finishing the tag with some sandpaper, go over it with a metallic paint, and then finish it off with some Mod Podge. It will take you maybe an hour of work, not including drying time. It's a neat little prop and a great reminder of a series I enjoy. If you want to make your own, I've linked to the file in the description. If you want to support the channel, then please like and subscribe.